Hello, everybody. I hope you're all having a wonderful night slash early morning. It's now 4:01 in the morning on December the 4th, 2021. I realize it's been, a year and a half, nearly 2 years since I've put out a video. My aspirations with this channel totally died, so once again, my apologies. But hopefully, in the coming months, with being off from school and Christmas, I'll put up some more content. Can't always promise, excuse me, that it's going to be of phenomenal quality. I don't have a lot of great recording equipment, which you will see uh, very soon here. But I figured I would at least give my thoughts on Kaitlin Bennett, her conversion to Catholicism, and her discussion on atheism. Now, typically, I would not do this. I myself am not a person of faith. I'd like to have discussions on this, but unless somebody comes up to me about it or starts the discussion on atheism, that is, and faith, I prefer in general not necessarily to always have it, because you can obviously have your faith and I can have my lack of faith, and the world is big enough for both of us, at least from my perspective. Um, the difference with Kaitlin Bennett here is not only is she a public figure, but she is also likely doing this performatively, especially once you take into account her opinions and actions regarding other things. So let's give this video a watch together. Once again, sorry for the recording quality, and then I will just interject whenever I deem necessary, or at least to further the conversation. So let's enjoy this funhouse hall of horrors that is Kaitlin Bennett's faith journey.
A lot of you may be shocked to hear this, but for the last 3 years you've been watching my videos, I was an atheist. But that's not the case anymore, and I want to open up to you guys about my journey. Being an atheist is not what most people think it is. At least it wasn't for me. Most of you probably think that people are atheists because they want to do whatever they want and have no consequences. If you don't believe in God, His commandments, sin, or hell, then you don't have to worry about living a sinful lifestyle or feeling guilty for your actions. This will
Okay, so on this, she's 1000% correct. There typically, my apologies there, the screen flipped around. There are typically two different schools of thought on atheism. One being the nihilistic school, which is the idea that just kind of do what you want here. Don't be necessarily a bad person, but it doesn't really matter. Nothing really matters. You're going to die. Who cares? And then there's the more stoic, humanistic view, which is okay, all of that is technically true, our time on this orb is limited and we will likely just die, and that is it. However, that does not mean you should waste the meaningful seconds and moments while you are alive, because due to how we perceive existence and just the fact that we are living, we can make a difference in other people's lives, and so you might as well do that while you have the chance. There are things to live for, like truth, love, beauty, and these kind of conversations, in fact, are would be an example of that. Discussions about what is true, what is right, what is beautiful, what is moral, what is wrong. Um, that's more of the humanistic stoic school, and that is the school that I subscribe to. So she is at least correct there. However, she's going to go from the humanistic atheistic perspective to the nihilistic and basically shatter everything that she just said in about 2 minutes time. So let's watch this implode on itself.
was not the case for me. Everything I'm about to tell you is, of course, from my own experience and my perspective. Being an atheist was one of the most terrifying things I ever put myself through, and I did it for more than a decade. Because I was so ignorant and uninformed, I feared what it would mean to go to hell. When I started doubting God and religion at around 12 years old, it came from a place of
Okay, so I do want to comment on this really quickly. Um, just because you might consider yourself now informed, this does not mean you are all of a sudden not afraid of going to hell and or the possible consequences. Also, I would like to make just a point here. Um, you were 12 years old. Children can question religion, they can think about these things, but they are not capable of thinking about these things in the same depth that an adult can because they have not lived life enough to really explain, to understand, and then capably explain the arguments they will put forward and or the lack of arguments they will put forward. So I would suggest that part of the reason for this weird conversion and this weird sort of discussion is because she'll even say this later in the video, so I'm not, misinterpreting her words. She just decided at 12, okay, well this isn't true and I don't care. She kind of that was it. That's where the discussion stopped for her. So we'll go through that when it comes to it though.
disbelief at the stories in the Bible and also being scared of hell and Satan. It was easier for me to just reject it all if it meant not taking seriously the possibility of burning in hell or the reality of Satan. But that did not make my fears of those two things go away. The most memorable fear I had was dying. The thought of my death terrified me. Did I really live just to be put in the ground? Is my whole existence going to end with worms eating my brain? And the worst part was thinking, what would my family endure after death? Would I
Okay, so we've now reached the part in the video where she just entirely went back on her original statement where she said, well, for me, being an atheist was this. And then now all of a sudden, she basically just said, okay, well, I'm terrified of death. We just die and we stay in the ground. And is that the end? Is that terrifying? There's a big emphasis on being terrified of death as a state of being. I would like to say that is natural for all human beings. In fact, it is necessary for our survival. We are animals and we are not comfortable with things that we do not understand or do not know. In fact, there's a really great discussion from two different authors, I believe. I forget their names currently, about the state of being dead versus the fear of death. One of them puts forward the idea that you are you need not be terrified of death because you will not know you were dead. But the other author in question suggests that, well, this is the very thing that does and must make you afraid, is that you will be able to experience something that you cannot think about and or cannot feel, but you know it's coming for you nonetheless. Once again, my apologies with the screen flipping around here. Doing this on my phone because my laptop is broken. So once again, big apologies. As an atheist myself, and as a humanist, as a Stoic, most especially, I kind of live by the maxim of memento mori, which is the idea that someday you too must die. Not will die, you must die, because your death makes way for others, for your children specifically. You know, parents make plans with their children and have children in the expectancy for them to outlive them, for the children to outlive the parents. It's a natural state of being. That doesn't make the process comfortable, and nobody worth their salt, and no atheist worth their salt will say this. Um, that they're just comfortable with death. I'm comfortable with the idea that I will be dead. I'm not comfortable with the state of being known as death, if that makes sense. There's no point in being terrified of dying because you will die, but I am terrified of not knowing per se. And maybe terrified is the wrong word here. I would just say I'm uncomfortable at the state of not knowing of what's next or if there is anything next. Um, she'll make this point, but I figured I'd bring it up just to open the discussion some more. She will, from here on, act as if her faith gives her warrant to say beyond a shadow of a doubt that, oh, wow, this is all true, and I just know it's true because I guess divine revelation and I was told that. That is not also true, Caitlin. All of the I can grant you all of what you've said so far, and I can grant you everything of what you're going to say, but your conversion and your semi hilarious prayer story that we will get to in a few moments does not prove that you are correct or that I am correct. Not in the slightest. We're both at the same position. The difference between you and me is that you claim to know, whereas I say I do not know.
I really never see them again. Unknown to my 12-year-old brain, rejecting the goodness of God's light for the sake of trying to minimize my fears of hell would lead me to exacerbate my anxieties and fears surrounding this topic. You see, what would always occupy my mind was the question, what if I'm wrong? And that is an uncomfortable.
Welcome to the human race. She's just about to say I was uncomfortable with that. I know I'm interrupting a lot, but there's just so many points where I don't understand her thought process, or at least I don't. I think it's just incredibly flawed. Yes, you are going to be scared of death. You are going to be scared of the notion of hell. Hell is a terrifying notion. It's, in fact, in my opinion, an immoral notion, but we'll get to that later. Um, just because you have a faith doesn't all of a sudden mean that this fear should go away or that it does. In fact, it very clearly doesn't because Christians will either themselves be so afraid of going to hell that they'll make needless amounts of prayers of forgiveness for every little thing that they do, assuming that every little thing will, by some metric, I imagine, piss off God to the extent that they'll be excluded from His mercy. I know that's not everybody. I'm well aware of that. I was raised Catholic, and that will be a later topic of discussion as well. But the way that she's framing this is as if, because of her new revelation and new conversion, this is just gone. That is physically impossible, and I would hold to a great to a great degree of skepticism and scrutiny anybody who says otherwise.
Feeling to live with as a teenager and young adult. I firmly believe that anyone who proudly boasts their atheism is trying to convince themselves that they're right, not the people they're boasting to. And that comes from experience. Even though it scared me, I had always heard that if you reject God to your friends, then He will reject you from heaven. Well, I had already done that, so why would I stop? Unfortunately for me, I did not grasp the depth and beauty of what Jesus' death meant for people like me. I truly.
There are a few more things, a few more beautiful things to unpack in what she's said in the last few sentences here. So she essentially states that once again, this phone is flipping around. It's wonderful. Love that. She essentially states that at one point, she had done away with God. She says, God doesn't exist. Therefore, why would I stop? Because the idea is that she has heard that her rejection of God will lead her to hell. And she's like, oh, fuck it. Let's just not think about that anymore. We're just not going to get back into it. Which to me means that those initial discussions fell on deaf ears. It also suggests that she's unable to think critically, because nobody does that. In fact, myself, even, somebody who I would consider to be a very strident defender of atheism, and even to an extent at times, still a defender of certain faith based concepts, um, would not say, and I know many people who also would not say that they all of a sudden stop thinking about it, and it's just it's a decided topic. Um, and even though she acts like this, she'll later state again that she doesn't think about it anymore. and that she doesn't think about the things that terrified her anymore because of her faith, which is, I think, one of the most dangerous things about religion is the idea that discussions on morality and the future of the human race, the future of the future of the species, the future of the globe, the idea of what could happen after your death, that all of these things are already previously determined. If you would just accept this bottle of colored water, this placebo, this um, strawberry dipped in chocolate that helps soothe the blow of your inevitable demise, then everything will be determined and you don't have to think about it anymore. How great would that be? I do not share this view. I think that that is a terrifying thing to tell people, and it's a very immoral thing to tell people that these things are already decided, and it's just these guys versus these guys. It's the we have this revealed truth versus those who do not. I also want to go back to her statement about atheists just stating that they're atheists to convince themselves. I believe that can be true in some cases, particularly with incredibly young atheists or quote unquote atheists who are like, 14, 15, probably I would say up to like 19 and 20 and even beyond that. But I think it's more prevalent among younger atheists because they haven't thought about these things as deeply, that they're saying these things in order to convince themselves. The exact reverse is true for Christians. A lot of Christians will continuously hear arguments from atheists and then repeat the same mantra to themselves to reassure themselves that they are right. And a lot of nihilistic atheists in particular will also do this. The problem is, no atheist that I would consider worth their salt, or agnostic that I would consider worth their salt, would ever say, I am right and you are wrong, and this is beyond discussion and beyond a shadow of a doubt. We would show you what we believe is incorrect. We would have a probably very, very serious discussion about that. Maybe even one that isn't too friendly, because this is a very sensitive topic for everybody. Um, but no atheist worth his salt would say, "Nah, I know there's no God. Screw you." Um, well, some would, but the respectable ones would not. You will find this is not true the other way around. Most Christians of all kinds will say, beyond a shadow of a doubt, we know, and they'll even view doubting as a sin, as a terrifying prospect of that could potentially rob them of their future prizes in heaven.
We had no understanding whatsoever of his mercy, his sacrifice, and ultimately his forgiveness until now. When I would get mobbed on college campuses by hundreds of liberals, I would constantly have anti Christian remarks hurled at me. The students would accuse me of being a Bible thumper, a stupid Christian, and you get the point. But when I would tell them I'm actually an atheist, they would be shocked and almost seem a little more accepting of me. One time, a guy actually backed off from berating me in a mob of 400 people when I shared that information about myself, and it did not make me feel good at all. How could I possibly align with people who treat others with no dignity? I was actually so embarrassed of myself that I would make sure those parts never made it into the final video.
My apologies, there was just some technical difficulties. Um, Now I think that we should probably unpack what she said there. So I will skip over for now the part where she is saying that God is offering you such a wonderful gift and why that's a very pathetic placebo attempt, right there by most of the religious people. Um, and I will shift to her discussion on, being in a mob and uh, people attacking her for thinking that she's a Christian because she has said some pretty ridiculous things, even by conservative standards. And then she'd say, "Well, I'm an atheist," and they'd all of a sudden give her shelter. Excuse me, Caitlin, if I don't necessarily believe you there. And it's very convenient that you have never released full videos where this would happen and or ever mentioned it ever before at all until this point. Trust me, I've looked into it. But Just because a bunch of people are rude to you because they disagree with your political opinion does not mean you must align with them on everything. That's kind of the thing about being an atheist, Caitlin. This isn't really a group of people at all. The only thing that really unifies all of us is the non belief or the supposed non belief in God or any sort of deity, or at least the questioning of that deity. That is it. All of us have different methods of thought and different methods of discussion on the topic. So you can't put everybody into the same bucket. Um, that's a very Reddit atheist kind of thing to be just a dick for no reason. I can very much so be sort of flamboyant in my debates and rather harsh in my debates and discussions on this topic. This is typically brought about by personal experience, and I know I have to deal with that, and I know I have to change that. But to paint them all with the same brush is kind of ridiculous. Uh, she's about to give an example, which I will intend to take down very quickly, but I will let her give that one for herself.
Even when I was an atheist, I always believed in right and wrong, and good and evil. One issue I've always been very passionate about is that I'm anti abortion. I've always recognized that every human life is sacred, but could not justify my position without God. It seems so obvious to me that some actions in this world are blatantly evil, but how could I say this if there was nothing in the universe to decide what's absolutely right and wrong? If, in the end, nothing matters, then why would it matter right now? I battled with those feelings.
All right, there we go. First off, she turned into a nihilistic atheist again. Nothing matters, therefore, fuck it. Nobody who's an atheist thinks that who's worth their salt, once again. So, I have experienced exactly what she just experienced with a pro life argument and debate that happened on campus. I am pro life, but I was playing some sort of atheistic defense for an atheistic defense of pro life versus pro choice, right? You can believe that human life is important, or if I am to steal a phrase, sacred, without the existence of a deity because you understand that you wouldn't want that to happen to you. This is what we call the golden rule, and it's not a principle owned by Christianity. It was first in ancient China, then in ancient Greece, ancient Rome, all of these places well before the existence of Christianity or even any of the major Abrahamic faiths already had this code in place. So it just takes a basic understanding of I wouldn't want to die, they wouldn't want to die, I know my life matters. I know that their life probably matters to somebody else. That's where the discussion is at least started. It doesn't mean that's where the discussion ends. I realize that was a very dumbed down approach to it, but that's where the discussion on the importance of life would arise. So once you've established that a human life is important based on your own personal merits and based on your own critical thinking skills, you can then say that the potential for a human life, this is the approach that I take, the potential for a human life, so the zygote, once the zygote is formed, or even at some point a few weeks later down the line, if you want to concede a little bit of territory, should have the same rights and same protections as a human being because it is a candidate for human life nonetheless. And to do away with that candidate is irresponsible on the part of the parents, barring the typical three discussions that are brought up incest, rape, and death of the mother. I'm not going to get into my opinions on those three, but I do think those are three decent conditions under which abortions could be allowed. That does not mean that I'm going to use that to say that all abortions should be allowed. That is ridiculous, and that's kind of the scapegoat now. Is a lot of the progressives will say, "Oh, well, um, what about when the mom's raped? Or what about when the mom's gonna die? Or what about if it's incest?" And then when you ask them, is that all you mean by that? They'll say, no, I think all abortion should be legal. So that would be a very disingenuous debate, but I'm not going to get any further into that. I want to stick to Caitlin here. It's very difficult, though. Um, so going back also, I want to have a discussion on objective morality. Objective morality is a very controversial topic in these sort of religious circles and the anti-religious circles, right? So Christians and believers believe that a deity or a higher power gave you your morality, and therefore that is why it is important and sacred. Most atheists believe that we determine what those higher moral values are because through evolution and time, we had to determine that certain behaviors were beneficial for for our survival, and then for our society and civilizations once those things began to crop up. I take that view. I think that there isn't technically an objective moral standard that's given by God, but there are things that we have determined through the annals of history to be objective moral standards for the good of society and each other, right? This is why murder is still wrong if you're an atheist. This is why thievery is wrong if you're an atheist. This has nothing to do with higher value moral concepts. This is the idea that there are certain behaviors that damage other people, and therefore you should care because by proxy it could damage you. Um, I kind of hate the whole morals are given to you because if they're given to you, it's not very moral. That's kind of the issue, right? If it's just given to you and not I'm not saying discussed with you. Obviously, parents discuss morals with their children, but the children themselves at some point when they grow up have to determine for themselves what their morality is. That doesn't make it right necessarily because you can decide something that's objectively wrong. You could decide that killing people is fine. That doesn't make it fine. That's an example of one of those uh, moral concepts that humanity as a general species has determined is far worse for the social group because it would lead to the destruction of that social group, and we need to all exist, correct? If we were to allow all murder and all killing for any reason, no matter what, or all theft, whatever, eventually that fire would spread and hurt everybody. That's the general humanistic approach. Um, and that's why I kind of hate her argument based around, well, if you're just gonna die, nothing matters, because that's kind of the argument and issue with postmodernism, and the argument and issue with nihilism, right? Um, and that's kind of a bastardization of Nietzschean nihilism. Nietzsche does have a certain degree of moral philosophy about him, so I won't demonize him more than I have to. But most basic nihilists who just say I'm a nihilist don't fully understand the concept, so they'll just kind of continue in that vein. Um, just because it's given to you isn't moral, so I want to expand upon that, right? So, what makes certain acts of bravery and valor more impressive or more sacred than others? The idea that there was zero benefit for them at all, and there was zero need of it, yet they did it on their own merits as a human being for the good of somebody else, right? So, many Christians um, give to charity because the Bible says so. But what about the man who gives everything he has simply not because he was told to, but because he realizes people are struggling and he can help? That's a higher moral interaction than the previous because I was told so, or the person who jumps on a grenade when a grenade is thrown into the room, not because the Bible told him it's good to sacrifice your life for your friends, but because you truly love your friends and you love them to the point that you would love yourself, therefore you sacrifice yourself for them. That's a humanistic concept that isn't owned by Christianity at all. Altruistic death or not altruistic, but death for the sake of others, is not a new concept, and it didn't just happen when Jesus stapled himself to a couple of two by fours. I realize that's a little flippant, but that was kind of the point.
Internally, wondering if I truly believe there's no God, why do I feel so ashamed for saying it out loud? It's because the truth.
It's because people around you and your family, which you are also going to kind of discuss later, um, we're religious and people around you are religious and they will make you feel bad for it. And it also sucks when you don't understand what you're saying. When you don't understand what you're saying, you will feel bad for saying it out loud because you will realize anybody could call you on your bullshit at any given time. And if that happens, you will look like a fool. That's the biggest issue.
About God, Jesus, and our creation is written on our hearts for us to search for Him and ultimately end up finding the truth that is so apparent if you just seek it. I'm sure many of you are asking.
All right. Once again, I realize I'm stopping this a lot, and this is going to be one hell of an interesting comment section. If anybody cares to actually discuss what I'm talking about here, I really would love to have the conversation. And I realize I'm getting more aggravated. It's just because it's Caitlin. It's not even because of what she's saying. It's just because I keep thinking of her fucking gun girl videos. Um, look, to say that, oh, all you need to do is simply believe it and you'll get this big prize. But if you find that explanation wanting, so let's say you find the supposed mercy of Jesus Christ wanting, like you don't think the story is moral, or you don't understand it, or you were taught to not think it's moral. And if you don't, but that's one thing. And then to say that, well, if you don't come to the understanding that this is moral and it's good for you and you must believe it because it's been revealed to you, and therefore there shouldn't be more discussion on this topic, is immoral. Because that is basically what all monotheists are called to do. You put aside your doubts and your discussions on faith and morality and you believe it because it is simply moral. But pray tell, what happens to the supposed loving and merciful God if you, by chance, don't end up believing this? If you for whatever reason you're like, look, I want to believe it, but I can't believe it. There are a lot of atheists who are like that, who just they kind of grew out of the faith and they can't go back to it. And then others, like myself, made an active choice to not persist in that faith, right? But most of us don't do it for the simple fact of hating religion. That's another nihilistic atheist point, is like, oh, I hate God. Well, it's kind of pathetic to hate something that you don't think exists. I don't running around hating on Santa Claus because Santa Claus is not real. Um, that would be pathetic. Um, so I don't think that it's moral to say, oh, you don't find my explanations very compelling. Oh, that's fine. No discussion for you then. I guess you're going to an eternity of hellfire, which is incredibly unjust and sickening. That it's funny that Christianity offers the least enticing depiction of the afterlife, but arguably delivers an explicitly pornographic discussion on hell and the amount of murder porn it basically talks about and everything that you're going to experience while you're in hell. In fact, I believe that Tertullian, one of the early church fathers, even said that one of the most delicious contemplations of the ones who are saved will be the pondering of the results of the damned. That might be the most psychopathic thing I have heard, and Catholics, and I can say this with merited experience, have said a lot of crazy psychopathic things.
What made me convert? I'm sure you can guess that the answer isn't that I had a magical experience that just changed my mind one day and I've been blessed ever since. Instead, it started years ago with my incredibly devout Catholic husband. We married in the Catholic Church in 2020 because he wanted to make sure our marital vows were sealed by Christ and fulfilled through the sacrament of holy matrimony.
Okay, well, now I get to put on my Catholic hat. I was raised Catholic, very devoutly Catholic, and very well read on Catholic doctrine. Uh, and I was Catholic until about 3 years ago. Right, and I believe I've stated this before. Once again, this screen is just loving flipping around on me here. Um, but she's willfully ignorant of the catechism, or at least she doesn't understand it yet. I'll at least give her that. Maybe she doesn't know about this. Um, the sacrament of matrimony does not require the supposed sealing of it by a priest. In fact, it's one of the beautiful things about the sacrament is it does not require the presence of a priest. It only requires the religious and explicit agreement on the heart of the man on the behalf of the man and woman together. It does not require a priest to seal it. It's just the explicit agreement that two people will love one another and be Catholics together is basically it. So like that kind of argument of like I was married in the church, and that's why it was just so important because our love can only be sealed by a priest and the sacrament. That's not necessarily true, and that's not what the Catechism states either.
I had no idea how important that was back then, but I'm so thankful today that he ensured that happened. Over the next year, I would continue to reject religion altogether until he asked me to attend Mass with him for probably the 500th time, and I begrudgingly agreed. Now, if you've ever been to a Catholic Mass, you might understand what I mean when I say I had a lot of questions about the faith and the traditions of Catholicism. So I started asking them. Then I would ask the same questions to many of my non Catholic and even non Christian friends. For months, I would just ask an incredible amount of questions and realized I literally knew nothing about Christianity.
This is where I'm going to make another comment about her being 12 when she decided this all for herself. That's the problem, Caitlin. You didn't know what you were talking about beforehand. You didn't have the necessary life experience to even attempt to do so. And therefore, whether you would have made this choice free minded or not, you just couldn't have decided whether you wanted to be Christian or an atheist or whatever else you might want. That is something about me that is different from most atheists. I don't desire to make the entire world atheist. Um, Partly because I think that would dull my existence. I like arguments and I like discussions on religion and morality and politics and things of that nature. That probably says something about me. But no, I don't wish to make the entire world atheists. I wish everybody would just think freely and think critically and at least have meaningful discussion.
Course, I rejected it for years. How could I accept something that I didn't realize I knew nothing about? The more I learned about the truth, the more the lens that I saw the world through changed. One of the defining moments where I realized I was wrong was learning that pride was the worst of the 7 deadly sins. Pride Month has always been toxic, predatory, and perverted, even from a secular point of view. It is not a coincidence that a lifestyle ingrained in depression, suicide, sinful behavior, and regret is given the title of the most deadly sin and then forced down our throats by every major corporation and social media platform and then targeted to child audiences.
I get to finally make a political point. Isn't that fun? So, I don't think there's a connection between the sin of pride, quote unquote, and Pride Month. That sounds like something you'd read on a mom's Facebook group. Um, Not in the slightest. I will go back to demonizing the other half of um, atheists that are nihilists, right? If you are under the impression that nothing matters and you are not intelligent enough or logical enough to think for yourself, and you do not think about these things in depth, then it would make sense that you would say nothing matters, therefore we'll just be all explicit about it. Now, I do not think that Pride Month inherently poisons the mind of anybody. I don't think kids should really be at like kink parades, if that's what if anybody wants to ask that question. No, children should not be at kink parades. But pride in and of itself just means that you are proud of something. You are proud of something. That is perfectly moral and fine. In fact, the demonization of pride is wrong because it is your own merits that got you there. Somebody can help you, but at the end of the day, you are the person who was able to make that thing happen. Now, that doesn't mean that if you're in a group project, right, and you do your part, that you can just take pride in the entire project. No, you take pride in your part and what you have done. It's kind of funny because in American society, anyway, from a Christian perspective, pride is to be looked down upon at all times, but because of the American spirit and ingenuity and more of the capitalistic drive that centers around America, you will also hear those same people in a different context say, "Oh, it's good to have pride in your work. It's good to be proud of something." Now, it's not good to be overly prideful, which I would basically say is arrogance, right? I would say it's something else. But just simply being proud of who you are isn't necessarily a sin. It is a little bit of self indulgent, I would say, and I think that if unchecked can lead to certain issues because then you become an asshole. You become someone who arguably thinks they're above other people, and that can be a problem. But pride in and of itself, you need to add more caveats to this issue.
That doesn't happen by coincidence. Now, I'm sure you all want me to get to the story of what was the turning point in my life that really brought me to where I am. Right after we renewed our wedding vows in St. Augustine earlier this year, we arrived home to find my 5-year-old kitty, Halsey, acting strange and throwing up. Long story short, Halsey ended up in the emergency room for an entire week with a suspected diagnosis of cancer. You can imagine how I took this news considering how much I love my cat. I went into a state of such sadness, hopelessness, and anxiety that I actually developed a skin condition that was lurking in my DNA, waiting to be triggered by a traumatic event. During this time, Justin offered to pray with me for Halsey to return home to us. So I did. Praying to St. Francis of Assisi, who is the patron saint of animals, was the only thing that brought me peace. It was the only time of day that I felt that no matter what ended up happening, I would be all right. Only when praying was I able to calm my anxieties. It also helped me ask more questions about how prayer works, how you're supposed to pray, and what you're supposed to expect from God when He answers your prayers. I do admit I feel a little vulnerable sharing this with you all because I know it sounds silly to be brought to my knees in prayer over my cat when there are several other issues in this world that I should have been praying for all along that do seem much more important than my cat getting sick. However, this must have been the journey I was meant to take, and I can't regret the path that brought me to where I am today.
All right. Well, I love that. I love that segment the most. I would like to juxtapose the image of God looking at starving children in Africa who are starving through no means of their own, and the parents, the very Christian parents in most African countries, who are praying that their children be spared this horrible death, and the fact that they will die of sheer lack of basic food and water, and then juxtapose that with Kaitlin fucking Bennett, who got her prayer supposedly answered for a fucking cat. I don't think this is at all moral to even suggest this is how God was working. If it is, and if that is how God works, that's very cruel and capricious to say, oh well, you prayed a little bit more devoutly, or I just favor you, therefore here's your cat. Whereas children die every day for lack of basic needs, lack of not having their basic needs met, and for some reason you put it upon yourself that God should answer your prayer and not them, when this is far more important. Obviously, the starving child is far more important than a cat. Just an important juxtaposition. And I do not want to necessarily hear the argument that bad things happen to people. That is a ridiculous argument in the cases of disease or in the cases of the lack of natural resources in an area. That isn't the same thing as somebody actively doing something to somebody else. Therefore, the argument would fall flat if it's just bad things happen. That would be kind of ridiculous because the suggestion through the statement, God would help me when I asked to pray for a cat. Let's say God might have thought you prayed harder, is that He's playing favorites, right? And if God is as equal, just, fair, and loving as you are suggesting, then God would not play favorites. That isn't how God is supposed to work from an egalitarian point of view. Now, to your point about prayer, and this will be where I wrap up because she kind of just finishes her discussion on how it's made her happy and better. And for the record, if she believes that, then I'm very glad, and I hope it works, and I hope it's content. Like she's content now. I do hope that. That doesn't mean you have to proselytize to everybody else, but I know damn well that won't stop you, especially you, Kaitlin Bennett, one of the most universally hated women in America. Um, Something that I think shows a great discredit to the merits of any particular religion is the fact that all religions, and I mean all religions, and even spiritual practices like Reiki, for instance, or meditation, uh, all produce the same effect. I'm aware of this as I used to pray very fervently. It's the idea that you will be very calm, at peace, even joyful or happy and warm inside, right? Because it's a sort of mental exercise for you. But the fact that this is achievable by everybody from the Catholic to the Muslim to the Buddhist guru or Hindu guru is it demonstrates to me that this isn't just an effect caused by the validity of your religion. Now, it is possible that either all of these gods exist or that God is existing in these multiple forms to all of these people. That is technically true. That's possible, except that's not what you're presupposing. That's not what you're suggesting um, as a reason for believing in these things. You're just saying, well, I feel good, or I feel a certain way, and therefore truth, because I feel connected. So I must be connected, right? That isn't how that works, not in the slightest. There's a multitude of psychological reasons why religion and prayer make you feel a certain way. I will watch a couple more minutes of this with you guys. You're from this point on, you're getting a little bit more of a live reaction because I've only watched to this point twice before, and then she just kind of rambles on. So unless I missed something, I probably this will be my last major comment.
And evidently, our prayers for Halsey worked. We were able to bring her home and get our crazy eyed girl back with us with absolutely no answers as to what made her so sick. All I know is that my husband has been praying for years for my conversion and an opportunity for me to see Christ in action, and that may have been exactly what happened. After falling on my knees in prayer in such a dark time, I now fall on my knees in prayer when I am overly joyful and thankful for the blessings I have today, which of course includes my Halsey girl. I'd like to give you some advice from a former atheist, specifically on how to raise your children to not end up like me. It starts by praying together every day.
Trust me, I don't need advice to help my children not end up like you. And that's more of a political point than it is a personal one. I do not actually know. It is more of a personal point. I do not want my children ending up like you, and it's not because you're religious. It's because you're an idiot.
As a family and making sure Christ is put first in your household, creating traditions that last for decades into their adult lives and eventually into their own families ensures they never have to go to bed with anxieties about their eternal life. I wish I
Not true. Many Christians fear what they do because they're so terrified it could send them to hell or make God angry. I've never understood. Well, I did at one point, but even when I was religious, and amongst many of my Catholic friends, it was a big point of discussion that we all kind of agreed on. I think that's something you'll find within Catholic youths is they're very open to discussion, and then for some reason, when they become adults, they shut themselves off to discussion gradually. Um, why are we all so terrified of God and hell consistently, even if we believe we've entered into this wonderful contract? That does not go away, and if it does go away, then why must Christians pray so incessantly for forgiveness? Not just simply saying, "Look, God, I messed up. Can you please help?" But even being brought to the point of tears, more so out of being scared than even really being you know, sorrowful because many of the offenses that Christians pray are fixed. They will religiously commit again. Um, so I don't think that's very good or a good point at all.
discovered the truth earlier in my life, but I am humbled to know that even a sinner like me was never forgotten by.
That's not humble at all. That is the exact opposite of humility. I used to be like you guys, but now I have this revealed truth that only I have the access to. Unlike you sinners. Well, not only I, but from the perspective is, I now have this truth and you don't. Ha ha ha! Isn't it so great? Now I will share it with you because I have this and you don't. That's not humility. That almost sounds as if you feel like you're on a mission from God. That was a reference. I won't even elaborate on it. I'll see if one of you in the comments can get it. That's not humility. No, That's just proselytizing.
God. In the months since, I decided to commit my life fully to Christ and am currently going through RCIA to convert to Catholicism. Some of you may be wondering, why the Catholic faith and not just Christian or non-denominational? In the beginning of this video, I mentioned that I asked several different types of Christians and non-Christians the same questions. The only answers that made sense were from the Catholic perspective. It is the only faith that can answer questions about the origins of the universe, the compatibility between faith and science, the way God reveals himself to mankind, the meaning behind sacred scripture, and the way in which he communicates his spirit to us sacramentally today. And the greatest thing is that it traces all the way back to Christ himself through a clear.
That's kind of wild. She's been Catholic for a very short time and she's already been run up on the playbook. Well, okay, this is where I will give a little bit of credit to the Catholic Church. Um, the Catholic Church isn't as rigid as most people believe it is. There is a lot of discussion in Catholicism itself within the church about things that should be amended or discussed. But Catholicism doesn't actually provide any answers that atheism does not. Not in the slightest. Uh, if you're going to provide a hierarchy here, it would be like non-denominational at the bottom because those people just don't really have opinions. Then your basic Protestant, then the Catholic, and then I would just this is gonna sound like I'm a supremacist here of some kind. Then I would say the atheist for only the following reason, right? The atheist will not claim to have all the answers and therefore is more open to inquiry. It's also important to realize that religion and science are non-overlapping magisteria, if I can steal a phrase from the dearly departed Christopher Hitchens. Uh, Science replaces the cries of religion. Religion used to have a very important place because it offered those explanations, but now we are finding more and more explanations every day and realizing that, if I can steal another phrase, we know more and more, increasingly, about less and less. Or, sorry, the other way around. We know less and less about gradually more and more. Um, I think actually that phrase would work both ways. Um, and it's very important to realize that. So it's kind of ridiculous to latch onto one faith over another just for a few pity points or for a few points of supposed revealed truth, which is kind of the point that she's making. I also am very aware that she was going to say that because we're kind of taught to say that when we're Catholic children, especially if you went to Catholic school like myself.
Succession of the apostles, so that we can be 100% confident that we are receiving the same Jesus as Peter and Paul 2,000 years ago, in exactly the same manner that he intended. As my priest would say, the other versions of Christianity that broke off from Catholicism failed to trace themselves back to more than a couple hundred years and failed to answer life's most important questions. When I'm seeking information, I want the full answer. I want to know as much as I can.
Okay, that's it. I'm done with the video because I'm repeating myself horridly at this point. But no, Caitlin, little Caitlin, you don't have all the answers. You just think you have all the answers. And I will give a slightly more clout to the Catholic Church here. That is a gradually correct opinion. I think that if Christianity has any merits or any truth, it must be found in its oldest form if there is to be a kernel of truth within it. It cannot be found in its later forms because each new version of Christianity kind of bastardizes the one previous, to the point where we're just stuck with non-denominationals who are like, Jesus is pretty cool, right, bruh? And that's about it. That's all it is. Um, all things considered, though, I do want to say this, and I do mean this, despite kind of my attempts at flamboyancy or even flippancy during this video. If Caitlin is happy, I'm very glad, and I'm very glad that she's found something worth that's giving her meaning. Right, I know it's very difficult to discern meaning, and it's easier to accept a meaning that's given to you versus one that's arrived at, per se. And that's not meant to sound cocky at all. I just know that not everybody thinks about these things deeply. Not everybody thinks about these things in the same way, I guess would be a better way to say that. Um, and that's fine. The issue is, and maybe this wouldn't be Caitlin's case, I don't know yet, because there hasn't been enough time, but most of the time, these people will not be content to say what I said earlier in the video. Um, you can believe what you believe, I can believe what I believe, and the world is big enough for both of us. As long as you do not tell me what to do, we're all good. That's it. Um, so time will tell about how all of this goes. But it's in my opinion, this is largely performative, and she's probably trying to chase more conservative money because it's probably drying up as she's no longer relevant to anything whatsoever. So, and that's not even smearing. That's just true. Like she's been deplatformed, wrongly so. I think the best way to combat bad ideas is through public discourse. Um, but she doesn't do anything. Um, she doesn't. She's not the leader of movements, and if she was, God, that'd be a terrifying movement right there, or anything of that nature. So anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I know it's very sporadic. It's gonna be poorly edited. I understand that, but I just wanted to get this out real quick. Maybe say hi, and yeah, look for more content coming very soon, guys.